I'm not going to spend too long on contraction cycles, but they are useful to be aware of. You may already be familiar with the fear of falling cycle. We use this a lot within public health and working with older adults. It is an example of a vicious cycle or a contraction cycle, which means that maybe you have a fall and then you have a loss of balance and confidence. Then there's that fear of falling kind of builds in again. You start restricting your activities so that you don't fall, but that also leads to reduced muscle strength and impaired balance, and then possibly abnormal gaits and feeling unstable on your feet, which then leads to an increased risk of falling, and then you may have a fall again. And these cycles can happen quite quickly, particularly as we get older. If we've had a fall, suddenly the avoidance behaviors maybe we stop doing that walking route that we did and we stop seeing those people and we stop exposing ourselves to what we perceive to be the risks. And then it leads to deconditioning, which then leads to more fear and having a fall. But we can apply these contraction cycles to all sorts of things. So if you're not um, at this point in your life, this may resonate with you. The pain avoidance cycle. This is really common. So after experiencing pain, it can be really common to develop a fear of pain, which could then lead to avoiding activities that could help recovery. So I think about if you've hurt your back, you think, oh, well, I hurt my back. I was doing something in the garden. I was lifting this thing. And actually, that probably means I'll stop lifting things. And so all of this movement pattern around lifting goes. And maybe you have a time where you're not having any back pain, but long term, it means that that avoidance behavior has led to, weakening muscle, weakening balance, and weakening strength. And then you end up in a position where you have to do that movement again and you end up back in pain. But you can see on this diagram, this can go both ways. Often they talk about if you can find sort of valued life goals, activities that are important to you, then you can start exposing yourself to more movements. And then over time, really start building in this sort of a richer recovery model. We can also apply this to anxiety, and this might really resonate, particularly post-COVID. This idea of a sort of social anxiety. So if you think about maybe you think, oh, I'm not feeling up to it today. I'm not going to go and see all of those people. So we maybe avoid that social situation, which has a kind of temporary reprieve, temporary relief. But over time, it builds to more anxiety and fear next time that we have to go into a social situation. And that builds into more anxiety and fear in the long run. So we'd often talk about procrastination, which is often just trying to avoid something that we don't want to do, and avoiding the threat can provide this temporary relief, but increased anxiety over the long term. So I think this resonates with a lot of us, particularly post-COVID. I remember thinking that there were points where I really had to make myself go out again because I could feel that I was finding it more and more difficult. And this is a really lovely model. This comes from Erin Elu, who runs the Agents of Movement podcast, and you'll find her on Substack as well. She's also done quite a few of she's done 2 interviews with us on the Playful Nature podcast. What I love about this social frailty cycle is it's a much more holistic framework because it really looks at the interplay between social disconnection and physical and emotional mental decline. So, with increased social disconnection, we may have reduced activity, which may lead to declining strength and balance, lower confidence, and increased fall risk, and then further withdrawal. And I think this can really resonate with you if you think about, for me, I'm thinking about my parents' generation. Your world can shrink very quickly, but I think looking at the wider social implications of that are really important. Luckily, however, we can create virtuous cycles. The cycles can go both way, and we can reverse contraction cycles to create these virtuous growth cycles. This image in the middle was made for physical literacy program in Canada with children, but it's just as relevant as it is for kids as it is for adults. It's this idea that with a little bit of, as you can see, a little bit of physical competence growing, your confidence grows and then your motivation grows. And that cycle very slowly can start to go the other way. But sometimes it just takes getting a toe in the door with a glimmer of what's possible, and suddenly you can start to see it reversing. and we start to think about these expanding our options. This is the zones of proximal development. If you come from a teaching background, I'm sure you're aware of this, but you've got your green zone in the middle of your sort of comfort zone by expanding your capabilities of what's possible now on your own, what's possible now with a bit of support, maybe into that lighter green ring, and over time you can start expanding out what you're capable of in these concentric circles. And we can apply this to any capability that might help you participate in an activity, whether that's strength or confidence or intrinsic motivation, whatever. It does imply that this is very linear. It's not always linear. There'll be moments of contraction and expansion, but it is a nice way to start thinking about what is possible now and how, if you can just get up a little bit to the edge of this idea of your sort of comfort zone and start expanding out from there, you can quite quickly start creating more possibilities, more opportunities for movement and social interaction. And how does your environment play a role in your capabilities? And how can we develop this idea of kind of your movement goggles? And it's not just your physical environment, it's also your social environment. There are so many different opportunities that maybe we don't know about right now. So we're just going to have a little look at that, which brings us to this idea of affordances. Affordances are features of the environment that create possibilities for useful actions. The presence of an affordance will continually shape our movement behavior. So often we have this picture here, which is a picture of a door. So you imagine you're walking into this coffee shop. It's this massive handle, but it's got a sign on it that says push. I mean, 99% of us are going to grab that handle and pull it. It doesn't matter how many signs you put on that door, you are going to pull that handle because that handle is an affordance. That handle affords you to pull the door, it invites you to pull the door. So this is how we can start thinking about affordances. Affordances are all around us, and once we start seeing them, you can. It's quite a fun activity. We often go on an affordance walk on one of our courses, just to start thinking about how our environments and our social and physical contexts dictate our movement behavior. So if we start in this top left corner with some adults, maybe they're the parents of the baby, they're on the ground and the baby is crawling around. They can see, because they're able to get down to the ground easily, the ground is an affordance and they can spend time on the ground with the baby. However, if you are unable to get down to the ground is no longer an affordance to you. Looking at this sofa, the green sofa couch, it's a kind of almost a futon, it's quite low. This is from personal experience when my dad had a very sore hip for a long time before he had a hip replacement later. But for a few years, we had a very low sofa in our house, and whenever he came to visit, he would often end up sort of hovering and leaning against the wall because the sofa did not invite him to sit down. It was not even a possibility. For most of us, the sofa is an opportunity to sit down. It affords us, oh, right, great, I'll go and sit down. But if you have lost that range of movement, then the sofa is no longer an affordance. We can also look at this fence in the left-hand corner. If you're there with a multi-generational group, you can see how affordances change depending on our capabilities and the stage of life. Let's say you're there with grandkids and then, parents in their 30s or 40s and then grandparents in their 70s. This fence could either be a barrier and an end of the walk. It could be for the 6 or 7 year olds. It could be an opportunity to balance along. It could be for the kids an opportunity to sort of go under and over. Maybe some people could vault it, but other people might see that as the end of their walk and have to go and take another route. Affordances change as well depending on our setting. So if we look at this tree, let's say it's a Sunday and you're in the park with your kids or your grandkids and it's a lovely day, the kids could see the tree as an affordance. So they could climb it and they could, hang off the branches. Maybe you could sit under it and read a book. That would be an affordance. It's Sunday, you've got all the time in the world. If it's Monday, however, and the kids are in school and you're going to work and you're wearing your work clothes and you're in a hurry, then you are crossing the same park and that tree is no longer an affordance because you can't interact with it because you haven't got time. You're wearing clothes that wouldn't allow you to sit on the ground or climb it. So it really, affordances are everywhere, but they change constantly. This is a great book if you haven't read it already by Todd Hargrove. But this quote is really useful, I think, when you're thinking about how our perception of affordances change. Some affordances can only be perceived with skill. When a novice rock climber looks at a climbing route, he may not perceive the easiest pathway, but an experienced climber will immediately see the solution. Skill is perceiving the hidden affordances that are there and ready to help you, if only you can see them. I think that's a really nice way to start thinking about it. It's just, I think the idea of the climbing wall is particularly evocative. If it's just a big cliff in front of you and you've never climbed anything, then that is not an option. There is no, it's not an affordance. But if you were a climber, then you could just see a route and get over it and it would be fine. So all around us, there are these movement opportunities, and sometimes we just have to learn to see them or to re-see them as well. Which brings us to this idea. Oh, sorry, don't know where that's gone. This idea of a kind of capability expansion cycle. The more that we explore and interact with our environment, we solve more movement problems, the more our confidence and our competence grows, the more our perception of what is possible expands, and the more opportunities for action become available to us. This action feeds perception, and perception feeds action. It can start really small. It could just be on your walk tomorrow. Is there a log that you could climb along or you could climb over? Is there a bench that you could maybe try and navigate over or under? They're very, very small things, but once you start seeing them and allowing yourself to experience that, to explore and to interact, to solve these different movement problems, then you do start to see your confidence and your competence grow, which then leads to this more expanding perception of what's possible with more opportunities for action that just kind of pop up around. And it could just be in your house, but also on your walk in your local environment that you've never even noticed before.